everyone, welcome to today's webinar from the MEF. My name's Tim Green, I'm the features editor of MEF, and I'm hosting today's conversation, the title of which is Using Natural Language Processing to Create Value in Messaging. So this is a topic that we've covered before on previous sessions, on previous MEF webinars, and previously we looked at it broadly from the point of view of mobile network operators and how NLP can help them to understand their traffic better, both to detect fraud and also to categorize their messaging so they might be able to get a better return on investment. So we're going to touch on that briefly again today, but the main focus of today's session is to talk about how NLP can help marketers with their messaging campaigns, both to improve the personalization levels, get better ROI, and also to comply with regulations and guidelines. And so to do that, I'm supposed to be joined by two experts, but at the moment it's just one, because one of our experts is having trouble dialing in. So the first expert we have is Michael Bordash, who's the GM and CTO for Machine Learning and Messaging at Realnetworks. And I'll introduce you in a minute properly, Michael. But we're also supposed to be joined by Andy Gladwin, who's Senior Director of Global Mobile at Cheetah Digital, and I'm hoping that he will appear as if by magic at some point in the next few minutes. So before we start the discussion, just briefly some housekeeping. Today's session is going to be about 45 minutes long. It will be recorded, and we will post the recording on the website and on MEF's social channels, and I'll also write a write-up, so you can review it or share it with colleagues who weren't able to attend today's session. We would love you to ask some questions. So if you have any, you just need to touch the screen and go down to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And I'll be looking at your questions throughout, and I'll drop those in, or we can address them at the end. And that's pretty much it. So let's get on with the show. Michael, can you just briefly introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. Michael Bordash. I work at Realnetworks, specifically for a division called Context. And Context delivers anti-fraud, anti-spam solutions for MNOs, as well as other machine learning classification and prediction algorithms for use cases in marketing, content creation, and other industries. Before this, I spent some time at IBM Watson, as a distinguished engineer, and before that I've been a startup guy, so CTO, engineer, a bit of data scientist, whatever it takes. That's what
excellent. Good. So a bit of science and a bit of entrepreneurialism and some messaging expertise. That's exactly what we need today. Andy, is that you coming to us on an audio basis only from your phone? Is this correct?
It is. I thought, in keeping with the mobile ecosystem forum, I would come in on mobile only. Sorry for the technical issues I've had, but Ring Central hasn't been too kind.
Right. Okay. Well, no problem. You're looking lovely today in all your green icon finery. Maybe you can just introduce yourself briefly as well, Andy.
Absolutely. So, Andy Gladwin. I work for a company called Cheetah Digital. We are the largest independent marketing technology company in the world, providing a cross-channel digital service, really focusing to marketers to enable them to drive engagement across customer lifecycle from acquisition to loyalty. Today, we've got 3,000 brands that use our service. Forrester recognizes us as a leader, and we send about 1 billion messages per day. And my role is heading up our mobile go-to-market offering.
Great. Okay. Well, first of all, let's dig into what NLP is and also how it applies to the operators. So that's something we've covered before, and it kind of brings it alive, really, for anybody who needs an introduction to this area. So, Michael, tell us what is NLP and how does it differ from machine learning, from AI, and so on?
Sure.
Give us a brief background.
The area of AI has many different branches of study, many theoretical, many actual, but AI itself has been around for decades and applied in businesses and industries around the globe. Machine learning itself is exceptionally valuable and has been for a couple of decades in helping predict outcomes, where the benefits of having a prediction outweigh the sort of costs and risks associated with a sort of automation or repetition or some other applications that require a lot of human effort. NLP itself is a branch of machine learning and AI that helps identify and classify parts of speech, language, analyzes segments of words for tone and emotional characteristics, and also interprets intention of human behavior through language. And then conversely is able to produce results like a sentence or a phrase or a characterization to help automate and assess how interactions occur between humans using language. I can go a lot deeper if you like, but those are basically what we're looking at today.
And so maybe you could explain some of the terms that are used around this topic, such as precision and recall, and just briefly, how does it produce the results it does produce?
Right. Yeah. Precision and recall are probably two terms that anyone who adopts a portion of machine learning in their application state will encounter at any point in their career. Those are very two specific terms, but there's a number of different concepts around that make precision and recall important. For example, a data scientist will work with a business leader to identify a hypothesis about behaviors of their customers, as an example. And when a scientist takes this sort of concept, they start to develop algorithms to determine a prediction of behavior. For example, potentially you have a greater confluence of individuals that are visiting a particular product, or maybe visiting a particular location in your in the travels, that have a higher propensity for buying something or putting something in their shopping cart. So scientists will look at that particular scenario and try to understand why that's the case. And maybe it's the language that's being used in the product, or maybe it's the location or other data that's being incorporated. So a data scientist will take this model and concepts and data and test against it using real data. And that's where precision and recall come in. So precision is a number that tells you how precise the results are. How good are the results that you're getting back? It looks at the relationship between all the predicted positives in your data set, those that were actually correct, and then basically looks at that over the entire positive spectrum, whether they're true or false positives. Those are in fact negative. And that tells you basically how good or precise the answers were. Whereas recall tells you effectively how complete the set was. In other words, was able to capture the entire amalgam, or how much of the proper positives were returned in the result set. So those two specific measures are then factored, or really averaged, in something called the F1 score. And the F1 score is a pretty good measure for a business person to understand how good a model is before putting it in production and affecting your business. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that. There's weighted averages across recall and precision. Yeah. And so you have to really tie in the use case and how true positives and false positives affect the outcomes. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but those are very important to kind of understand when you first adopt machine learning.
So Realnetworks has been building a product called Context to apply this technology to messaging. And you've been deploying it first with operators to scrutinize messages and for spam and so on. Briefly tell us how that works, so that we have a sort of a live story that maybe that can bring it alive for the viewers.
For sure. So Context itself is an amalgam of a couple of different facilities. One is a machine learning model, which has been developed and evolved, which is very important, for over probably almost a year and a half at this point, 2 years. And the model is important because it identifies and predicts whether a significant portion of messages coming through that are spam are actually spam. So if you look at a suite of traffic that's going across a network, machine learning is responsible for identifying 95 to 99% of traffic. Whereas in previous days, a lot of those were dealt with rules and very reactive. So having a model sit at the front and real-time predicting whether a message, the individual message itself, is likely spam, does help prevent significant amount of fraud, smishing, phishing, all kinds of different unsolicited spam that can come to the network.
And what elements in a message is the technology looking at in order to determine that it's spam? Is it misspellings or what sort of things?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. We look at the relationship of letters together, the characters, what characters are being used, the distances, different words in the sentence, the entire word itself, the phrase itself, all are used in real time to make that prediction. So words, we also look at the behavior historically of that particular sender over time. What network are they traversing? Are they a bad actor? Are they coming from a network that isn't really promoting good traffic? As well as images. We have a recent service that actually will take images through MMS and be able to scan that image and identify if it's text spam that looks like an image. So you see a lot of fraud that's bypassing some of the modern filters because they're not looking at images that look like text. They're going through MMS. So we now look at messages in the same way.
And this can also be used to categorize traffic. Is that correct? So that you can maybe tier your pricing a bit more effectively.
That's exactly right. So whether you are, so it's interesting to have spam and not spam. It's very effective, but now we can go into deeper levels of what types of spam are coming through and what types of non-spam or ham are coming through. And for that matter, are the profiles changing? Is someone using your networks in like gray routes? Are people using gray routes for A2P messaging? We can identify the types of those messages coming through and either block them or report them or enable you to take instant action to kind of block those types of traffic or even charge more, as you say. So great for governments, great for government compliance, for businesses, for networks. It's really a good facility for any type of business rules around this type of classification. Okay,
so it's fairly obvious what the benefits to network operators are, but obviously more and more brands are using messaging and putting messaging at the center of their communications with their customers, and sending and receiving millions of messages, especially as messaging goes to the cloud and becomes less of a wholesale business and becomes more of a kind of API business. So Andy, if I can bring you in, first of all, I'm getting some echo back on me now. I don't know if you can mute yourself until I. Yeah, thanks. So Andy, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Cheetah does and how important messaging has become to your enterprise customers.
I think that as we look at our enterprises around the world, the understanding that mobile is here and mobile first is something that is a given. And the way in which they use it, it varies by channel, but essentially for every enterprise, their challenge is to be there and present on the preferred native and habitual channel for customers. And in most instances, that preferred channel is increasingly becoming mobile. When we look at the barriers to this for them, they do have challenges with regulation. And so although most companies want to be mobile first and engaging over mobile, there will be that issue whereby they need to have confidence that when they do engage, they are feeling that they're not putting their brand at risk in terms of not being compliant with local laws and regulations, and also giving the right experience to their customer. And different levels of mobile channel maturity will have different levels of fear. And likewise, if you're sending messages within your own country versus internationally. But I think that the backbone to how mobile messaging is used is not too dissimilar for other channels, where data is key. And the challenge that most brands have is saying consumers are exposed to over 5,000 brand messages per day. And how do they find a way to engage with their customers, to stand out, to hold value, to drive whatever call to action within that environment? And the answer is by using data. And that data can help through different preferences. So directly asking customers, what's your preferred channel, but finding the right channel to send messages over, sending the right content. Customers expect to have a personalized experience that is contextual. and then sending it at the right time. And so all of these effectively drive together to load the dice to say, and when sending a message to a customer, let's get all the variables right to ensure that it has the intended impact that's going to drive a value exchange between themselves and the enterprise that is sending that message. And there'll be repeated testing and optimization, enhancement, and requirements for further data to continue feedback into that loop and try and find ways to enhance and optimize that engagement between themselves and their customers.
And what level of adoption is there of machine learning type technologies among the marketing community? Would you say that it's anyone's trying this, or is this something that's they're looking at for the future?
I think it varies by channel, really, Tim. So if we take probably one of the more advanced channels for it is push notifications and app engagement, where behavioral data is pretty rich. Being able to have a look with the aggregate reporting of customer behaviors within the app, and then use that to drive propensity models to say, what is their next activity going to be? What are their chances of opting out? What are their chances of deleting an app, of coming back to a drop basket, for instance? These are the type of things that there is relatively advanced and comfortable knowledge, which enterprises don't necessarily have to have that sophistication, but it becomes inherent within some of the more mature mobile app engagement providers such as Swerve. When looking at other parts of machine learning, I think that it can be seen as this is going to drive a huge amount of complication. And how do we get the data? How do we make the data we have actionable? How have we been tracking that data? And so the putting your toes in the water approach will be to look at using providers who have got their own data that they can provide with models, rather than having to reformat and reuse and build data from within an existing enterprise's environment. So I think that the answer to the question is, within push, I'd say it's relatively advanced. Within other mobile channels, less so. And the route that most enterprises have an appetite to move towards is using existing models that have been based on algorithms from large data that's been built to date, and then using feedback loops to try and fine-tune that and apply it with the impact of their own messaging and results.
Michael, if I can come back to you, I mean, I think you actually even used to, you were built up a startup that was based around push messaging. So what's your a sense of the potential and the sort of current levels of deployment of this technology among the marketing community?
I think there's definitely been a shift happening now between, looking at data science as specifically a quant area in terms of maybe predicting usage, or looking at analytical data and being able to identify, a subject, a send time optimization that most people are familiar with, and when to send the right time. So I think, data scientists, the marketing community have that pretty much down cold. I think the shift is coming now that we understand the behaviors and what's happening with my messages in the marketplace. What are the sort of the text or qualitative characteristics before a campaign even goes out? How do I craft the right content? How do I bridge my quantitative data with elements of the message that resonate more, whether it is through a bulk push or an email, whether it is a segment or audience, and specifically where it's definitely going to go to is one-to-one engagement. So inbound communication, one-to-one messaging in different channels. How can we automatically, using machine learning, pick the right tone, the correct intent, and the correct word choices that are going to, make sure that the brand is connected to the individual. And we see what's happening in the news today. The social movements around the world. We see relationships and brands being canceled because of, their missteps in the market, the very public missteps. As well as, saying they're for one thing, but actually not fulfilling on that goal. So these new folks that are the buyers in the market are going to be very reluctant to share a wallet with brands that don't resonate with them. So that's where NLP has a perfect space. Brand protection, engagement, increases loyalty, reduces churn. I mean, this is the right time for NLP.
And to come back to you, Andy, and welcome, by the way. Nice to see your face. You touched on the fact that this technology can be used to comply with either operator guidelines or even legal regulations. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So taking North America as an example, there are per operator different nuances and regulatory requirements and different keywords, phrases, materials, and content that they will be applying rules, blocking messages, or potentially fining enterprises for using the incorrect content in what's been broadcast to their customers. And again, this is something that for some very high-end brands, they are not wanting to disrupt their brand reputation. And so by using these type of tools where you can put in a message before just historically sending out, let's say 100 messages, and of those a certain subset will either be incompliant to go through and you're exposed to risk, not intended risk, but there is a risk there, or they're blocked because it hasn't got through an effective firewall. If you have the chance as an enterprise to have that arm around the shoulder of saying, before you send it, why don't you put it into a template, have a look through how you can ensure that it's not going to get blocked and it's adherent to all the policies of all the local operators. That's incredibly powerful to remove that fear, that risk, and to ensure, one, you're completely compliant in what you send, but two, that you're actually driving the right experience where we need to trust what the operators provide in terms of their rules and how they protect their customers. And you don't want to stand out in the wrong way in terms of customer experience. So to me, that's very powerful and something that within the group we have here today, loads of experts, of which it's all familiar with the rules, regulations. But for many enterprises, they're stepping into this, they see the value, but it can be a prohibitive step to go, what's the risk? And I think this helps to lower that boundary quite considerably.
And do they, how far can the machine learning go in that process, in the sense that you talked about having a template that you and you have intelligence inside that template that knows what the rules are that you're testing against. But is it human beings that have to, populate that engine with what the rules are and how the guidelines are changing, or can the machines somehow ingest that information without humans having to get involved? I don't know if I put that question very well, but
I'd love to take a stab at it first. And
yeah.
I think you're referring to training and ongoing maintenance of a model.
Of course, yeah.
So a model starts with like I said, a hypothesis, and then testing and testing and testing. There's rigor behind that data scientists apply before putting anything in the market. And there's a partnership with that model output, as well as the business person, the product owners that are responsible for the overall experience. And it starts with data and testing. Initially, you may have to label data. You may have to have a small army or a platoon, or maybe yourself, that will look at a handful of sample data and label it according to the proper outcome. Maybe a message is spam, or maybe a particular message is indicative of a marketing promotion, or something that's going to resonate with someone looking for updates on furniture versus chairs or versus clothing. So there's going to be a point in time where you're going to have to do some data collection, massaging of the data, and labeling the data. That data goes into the model and forms your version 1. When you put that model in production, the product manager has to understand that the benefits that you're going to get from a prediction in production are going to vastly outweigh having to craft all these rules and permutations beforehand. That was how it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. But with a model, and if you stick with it, it's going to pay back a value in tenfold. Going forward, going on. So you can't just put a model in production. You have to care and feed it like anything else. You're going to have your team observe the outcomes, observe the feedback from your customers, most importantly, whether the predictions that are happening are actually correct. And if not, why are they incorrect? That data, that valuable feedback goes directly back into your data science team. And that flywheel continues and continues, and your model becomes as smarter and more impactful and able to handle variances that may occur in your business over time. We see this happen with context. I've seen it happen at IBM. It is truthfully the present and the future for sure.
And to jump in and follow
I mean,
on
these
from
concepts. Sorry, carry on, Andy.
I was going to say that this is exactly the point of, from an enterprise perspective, that's a very scary environment, and this gives a leg up, saying here's your starting point, and then from there, optimization and enhancement to say how can you make sure that the not overly generic but relatively precise different sentiments and purpose of different messages, is that categorization correct, and is the algorithm correct? And you can continue feedback loops, but starting that from blank is a huge leap, whereas starting it from a very mature position that this offers, I think it is something that does make machine learning much less of a scary position for many enterprises who just don't have the in-house expertise to be building this.
And so a lot of marketers will find all this very persuasive for obvious reasons, but they might not really understand or have a mental picture of what this actually looks like. So what's the user experience of adding a machine learning component to your marketing automation and training it, using it on a day-to-day basis? Michael, what does it actually look like?
There are many applications. I think some very from a business perspective, there are definitely areas where you can embed machine learning today. For example, in the campaign creation process, to manage your channel, a machine learning assistant can observe the way you write text, you craft text, the way you insert images. And as you proceed to create your content, a machine learning will make suggestions. It will look at the audience you're trying to target and saying this audience actually should be using this type of language instead of this type, or these words for this similar promotion tend to resonate more with the audience you're suggesting. So you can imagine it like a mini assistant that can inform you where you might want to take a step in a different direction. And in a similar way, if you're a customer interacting with the brand, you see these things happening all the time. You see machine learning helping you write and craft an email in Google. You see abilities to send messages to a group of people because you've sent to them before, or adding someone else. All these little accoutrements to your existing experience are applications of machine learning that can start slowly and embed and improve your life and reduce your risk.
Did you want to add to that? Because obviously you're offering this single view of the customer suite. That's what Cheetah does. So how do you add a machine learning component into that and make it usable on a day-to-day basis by your customers?
So there are different ways, but looking specifically as what we have here, I think that there are two immediate opportunities, and that is simply to use it as a test bed before sending out messaging. And what that is, I described how if we had a client who were to want to build up their content to send an SMS and then have that reassurance that it's going to be delivered and it's compliant, that's part one. But part two is where I referred to loading the dice earlier, and how do you place all of the preferences, every part of personalization and data that a consumer has given consent and shared to have whatever value exchange it is in terms of their relationship with you and the brand. They're still looking and expect that to be contextual and relevant, and for it to have the right impact, you need to have the right tone, rather than just, it's the last variable as I see, in terms of you've got the channel, the time, the personalization, the content, but then how do you adjust that to make sure it's going to be as impactful as possible? And that's when you start to look at what is the sentiment it's going to drive, what is the emotion that's going to come from there. And so to take this as an example, you might look at a time critical sale for Black Friday, and you want to be placing joy and urgency around it. Whereas if you look at something that may be to philanthropy, you want to have potentially the correct amount of sadness in terms of tone when looking at the keywords and phrases within it. A fraud alert from a bank, you want to make sure that there's an element of emotional fear in there to try and drive an immediate response for the goodwill of the customer to protect themselves. So these are the things that I see. How does it look? It's using it as a test tool before sending to ensure you optimize. And what does that provide? Well, the normal way in which you would send out these messages with A/B testing. So you go and say, we sent out category A with whatever variables and then make associated tweaks to send out category B. What were the results?
Yeah.
What this lets you do that before you send out. And so it accelerates your ability to be very impactful by going and saying, we're going to send out this. Let's just check with the tool from the how many billion interactions that it's looked at before. What's the impact, the intention of the message, and how does that go to the perceived reaction and perception that you will gain from the customer according to historical data. And if you go, to put it into numbers, which I know doesn't justify all the hard and great work the context done, but if we're saying you're hitting 70% of what you want in terms of the spider diagram of the different emotions, and you tweak things here and there, you get it up to 85, 90, 95%, then you've saved yourself, many weeks of sending these messages. And if you get it, that can result in an opt-out. And the cost to opt in a customer and then to try and get them to opt in again after opting out is, insurmountable. And so this helps you to be impactful, bring forward the lead times of being able to drive the value of campaigns and maximize the value in those messages themselves.
If I can add, Tim, furthermore, beyond the prediction of content on an audience basis, that entire resonance of your brand's message to your customers becomes part of your IP, the brand's IP, the protected IP they can use to build your business. Because imagine if you now know how your customers interact with you from a loyalty perspective, you can look outwards and figure out who are the people that would be most similar in the realm of acquisition. So using Facebook's API, using other APIs, I have these behavioral resonance profiles that we create for you. Let's find other people that would believe in our brand in a similar fashion and would further resonate with me. It just becomes this great asset to use to not only maintain your loyal customers, but to build your business.
So Andy's just talked about sort of time saving and cost saving. What about the costs of actually adding this to your toolbox? So without obviously getting into specific numbers, is machine learning and NLP the kind of thing that Cheetah would just sort of add to its engine and then make that available to its customers, or would there be a price for using it, or how might it? What might the business model be for the end user?
And I think that it is seen as an additional software tool, and so additional SaaS license, as stated by Michael under the question, how do you integrate it and what does this look like? There are so many different ways in which it could be set up that will have quite a considerable impact in terms of the commercial model that's right to ensure the value for the enterprise aligns to the cost operations that sit behind that. And so, it will vary, but my expectation is the most common model that this would be served under is a software fee.
Anything to add to that, Michael?
No, that's exactly how I would mention it too. I think, based on the utilization of the tool in your environment, that's where the cost is going to be found. The more you use it, the better it'll perform. So I think it'll pay for itself over time as you invest in a tool.
So we've had a few questions while we've been speaking, and a number of them are asking broadly the same thing, which is how can we apply this technology to OTT messaging? So we kind of really talked on the assumption that we're talking about push and SMS and so on. But once you get into rich messaging with two-way interaction, how does NLP apply to that? Michael, maybe I'll ask you first.
I mean, I think OTTs are in an extremely fortunate position to be closer to the brands. The closer you are to the brands, the closer you are to understanding, content schedules, how content is being resonated. It's not just data flowing through a pipe. It is how they use your service in order to interact with their end customers. I think, because you're that close, you can start to seed in, greater value in terms of what you're pricing. So beyond an API, how is your content actually resonating? What is the most important parts of your content that are actually turning results? And most importantly, are you sending traffic that should be sent to the networks? Can we find the bad actors in the OTT networks and we know who they are, and stop them before they become a prize for the operators down the line? So I think OTTs have that mix of preventing and stopping fraud, but also providing great value for folks that use them. And RCS, RCS is going to be amazing for the operators because you're going to be able to provide the same level of interactivity and personalization that push notifications have today. I come from a push background, and the amount of data that you have available with that embedded receiver on the mobile handset gives you access to incredible amounts of data and algorithms that go beyond what you can have in a simple text message. With RCS, you're going to be able to level that playing field and actually use all that rich data to provide a personal experience without having an app, which I think is pretty damn cool.
And what do you think? Because your Cheetah, I think, was originally Cheetah Mail. It was sort of built on email, and obviously now you've talked about things like Black Friday alerts and so on. What about rich messaging, conversational messaging? Are you offering that to your customers at the moment, and how might machine learning improve that experience?
So right now we work with partners to fulfill those requirements at present. We see the different maturity levels across different channels, but certainly the consistent is the excitement around what this is going to be bringing, and our strategy is to get closer to that. When looking at the value of how NLP can impact it, I think about chatbots, and essentially that is a lot of stages where either in terms of NLP and machine learning being able to digest and provide open conversation with the client, but more common is a contained environment where it's lots of messages, and for each of those messages, just as if you're sending out SMS, you're saying what is the purpose, what is the intent, and being able to optimize multiple messages in a conversational journey rather than just a single message. And then also being able to wrap around propensity tools and models and data feedback from, as Michael correctly stated, all the rich information that's coming through carousels and pictures and videos, and seeing what's happening in terms of the reaction to it. So for me, I think that there's, it will need to pivot to do exactly what it does very well for SMS and compliance with regulations, to saying, well, what are the nuances for Facebook versus WhatsApp versus Apple Business Chat, WeChat, etc., and ensure that it can then go and say, again, providing that comfort. But then we look at the optimizing the impact and relevance and tone, then exactly the same happens, but to me it's within a conversation with additional data sets to further enrich it.
And so is basic question, but is something like context a real-time tool? So one can imagine that you type a message, you're a marketer, you type an outgoing message, you test it for sentiment, you test it for rules and guidelines. But if you're having a bot conversation with a real customer in real time, can machine learning modify the chatbot messages in real time using the same NLP, or is it something that you have to look at after the event and improve the bot for the next conversation that it has?
Well, I think with context, they both happen. Number one, right, in real time, and we've built a system which folks call Lambda architecture that handles extremely fast response for billions of messages a day. I mean, if you consider all the traffic we look at, we had to cut our teeth on making sure that our machine learning was responsive, scalable, and be able to very much perform within the SLAs that the MOs need to get the message to the end. So that same sort of real-time response is built into the other use cases, like for marketing that we have. So whether you're a business user using the tool here and there for campaigns, or whether you are using it on the front end to assess the sentiment of a search input or a chat input, it's got to be instantaneous. It's got to be within milliseconds that we make an assessment prediction about what the intent is and the right combination of response that should be placed in front of the user to elicit a goal. And that's where the second dimension is, the ongoing training. So yes, for sure, real time, we're going to make sure that the responses are correct and that the predictions are correct. Or we're going to be able to look at every interaction and weigh whether that was actually the right way to do it. And that's where the science comes back into the picture. And that's where the optimizations come in to make that real-time model better and improve over time. And finally, the last sort of piece is the product governance. The product managers have an incredible role here to provide the rails upon which science and the engineering need to execute to make sure that we're doing it right, and making sure that the false positives and the false negatives are not impacting to a great degree. So making sure that that tolerance is provided with a KPI and with expectations from product management is the last piece of the picture. With those three things, the real time, the science, and the governance, you're going to have a recipe for success.
Great. We have had a question which I'm not quite sure what the question they're asking, but spam control versus privacy. What is your experience? I mean, I would imagine that that is a question around, if you're scrutinizing people's messages, is there a privacy element that you have to be careful of there?
Yeah, I think number one, we have to be GDPR compliant. So any requests that we get from our uplines and downlines about deletion or what do we know, those are fulfilled for sure. But in terms of sort of the macro picture of GDPR and privacy, machine learning is ideal, because a human doesn't need to look at the message to classify it. We have a machine learning model. We use samples of data. We pull out any PII automatically, so no one can see a number or name. We tokenize them. And that data is utilized to train it going forth. And so you have to be respectful of privacy, but your scientists, as well as your production runtimes, also need to secure and make sure that we're in guidelines. I think it's different from spam control, which generally is a judgment of the operator. Governments, like the Can't Spam Act in particular, is a guiding force amongst messaging. And the general consensus of what is unsolicited mail. And that is, there's definitely gray areas there, but that is the business of the operators to determine what is acceptable and what isn't. So all those sort of controls, spam control, variance of control, and compliance with relation to government specifications have to be included and are included in a solution-like context. And
Andy, again, yes, thank you. I'll hand that one over to you as well, Andy. I mean, you talked before about regulation and guidelines, but privacy is a sort of related to that, but it's more of an ethical issue. So, do you see similar positive potential with machine learning to impact that area?
I think that the market's changed, like from Cambridge Analytica going forward. I think that stat is 49% of North Americans have actively chosen to not share data for privacy reasons, and is becoming more and more conscious of not just consumers, but internet browsers like Firefox, Safari, Chrome, pulling back their cookies, iOS reducing their location tracking. And so the market, from just overall in terms of ethos, is starting to say, how do we manage data? When it comes to machine learning, it's something that I think it's, from an enterprise perspective, there needs to be more education as to how it's going to. It's not people going through messages and reading messages. It's looking for keywords and clusters and removing things that could be that could be PII or sensitive in any form, whilst having to align to GDPR, CCPA regulations, and others I'm sure will crop up as this trend continues to develop. So for us, it's absolutely essential, data privacy and security, when we work with our enterprises. Looking at machine learning, I think it's saying, here is the data, say from our side, that there are two parts. There's the external data, and then there's the internal. With the internal, we look at how we best manifest and use and provide relevance and context with the consent of customers who have said, here's my name, my email address, my preferred color, football team, product, whatever it might be, and use that to ensure that when we converse with them, that we're driving the value that they have given to us for exactly that reason. And then in the terms of machine learning, that's when we start to look at these other models and say, that is to help engage, make it compliant, rather than to go overly big brother and creepy in terms of some of the methodologies that haven't been as successful to date.
Great. Okay. Well, that's a positive note, and I think we've come to well over 45 minutes now. So I'd like to thank Andy and Michael for sharing all their insights so eloquently. And I'd like to thank you for joining and for watching. And I'll remind you that we will be posting this full session on MEF website and social channels in the next day or two. So I urge you to watch that if you have any colleagues that want to see it. So until next time, thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.